Hello everyone, welcome back to True Eagle. I want to discuss a few things today, a bunch of different topics, and firstly I want to talk about Jarrad Schofield, his prospects as becoming senior coach going forward permanently, and a little bit about Tom Barris, who it's more or less been reported now he's set to join Hawthorn, whatever exactly that means, and then a little bit on someone like Tim English as well. So I want to title this video, what does Jarrad Schofield need to do to be Eagles coach? And maybe that's a good starting point for this discussion because, as results have gotten better in the 5 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever it's been under Jarrad Schofield, I think it's been 5, we've won 2 of them. Things are looking good, obviously, and, there's a lot more optimism. 2 wins in a row. Not many would have seen that coming when we sacked Simo. It looked very much like there is a good chance we were not going to win a game for the rest of the season. As it happens, change in coach has brought about an improvement in form. And, there's a bit of discussion out there as to what extent Jarrad Schofield can really win over the Eagles board, I suppose, and do his chances some good of becoming senior coach in 2025. Now, the performances, I think, for the most part, other than the St Kilda game, have been very, very acceptable in terms of showing that improvement and a real consistent brand. Now, the biggest caveat to that you'll see when it's discussed in the media is the whole caretaker coach. And it's interesting watching Kane Cornes talk about this. You can tell he's conflicted because he obviously played with Jarrad Schofield, so he's given him a heap of praise, saying he's the right man for the job. But then on the other hand, saying the caretaker thing is iffy. And that's kind of true. And it's actually a point I've made myself. You look at in the past, and there hasn't been a huge amount of examples. Now, West Australian actually did put up an article that I can't see because it's paywalled, but they did an analysis of caretaker coaches and how well they go. So I don't think, without being able to see all of that and going off the top of my head, I don't know if the numbers will be super compelling. I know that Paul Roos, I presume that was at Sydney, was the caretaker coach there. I don't think they're referring to Melbourne. He wasn't a caretaker coach there, was he? So let's go back to Paul Roos in Sydney. He was the only one to become a premiership coach. Since then, I can think of 2 caretakers that took over and actually won a permanent senior coaching role. That was Brett Ratton with St Kilda and David Teague. Forgive me, I just can't remember any more than that. And that's probably telling. But it is a very small sample size because I don't think it happens that often. But it's worth noting 2 of the more contemporary examples we can think of didn't end well, bearing in mind they were at Carlton and St Kilda, clubs who have, routinely not been playing finals much over the last 10, 15 years. I don't know to what extent that's a factor. You can have your own opinion. But I suppose on the one hand, it is true that those examples didn't work. And what we can sort of reasonably expect when caretaker coaches take over is it does generally come with an improvement in form. Now, what exactly is that down to? I think it's probably there's some sort of psychological shift that happens within a playing group when the coach changes. And to some extent, maybe there's players who thought they had a spot on the list. Now that's thrown into question with the change of a senior coach. Or is it just a big symbolic indication that things are not going well at a football club and it motivates players? Who knows? Is it really a coach coming in and instilling a game plan that clicks immediately and they start to improve? That's the thing we need to question here. On the other hand, given that that's a small sample size, there's a part of me that doesn't want us to potentially overlook the right man simply because he's a caretaker coach. We shouldn't discriminate against a candidate simply because they were the caretaker coach, because there is a statistical indication that generally it doesn't work out. We need to pick the best man for the job. So I have thought for a long time that Jarrad Schofield would be a great senior coach. And, when we recruited him from Port Adelaide, and even when he was at Subiaco, I was thinking, it would be cool one day if he's a coach of the West Coast Eagles. I didn't foresee it would happen in this nature where he's called up to be a caretaker in light of Adam Simpson getting sacked. And I think it's important to say that I've always liked the idea of him as senior coach, and I think the biggest argument against him is that he's been involved at the football club throughout this poor period. Now, that's not to say that he's tainted with that, in my opinion. I don't think one person should be tainted with that simply because they're guilty by association, but I think it does work against the potential benefit of getting someone from an external viewpoint and an external look at this list and different ideas, and that's where someone like an Ash Hansen comes into this, being involved at Carlton. Now, a few weeks ago when Carlton were being talked about as top 2, this looked better because he was involved at a relatively successful club. Now things are going to shit there. To what extent should Ash Hansen's legitimacy live and die by that? Again, I don't really know what the answer is, but probably not that much. So that's what we lose if we potentially go with Jarrad Schofield. Now, my viewpoint is that, we absolutely still need to go through a pretty rigorous process of finding the next coach, and Jarrad Schofield will need to interview, presuming he is at all interested, which I think he is. If he's interested, he'll need to, apply, I suppose, and interview just like anyone else. And that interview process needs to be extensive. And, I think we did a really good job when we signed Simo. So we needed to go through all that again and hopefully pick the best man. Now, I suppose to what extent can Jarrad Schofield do his chances good or harm in his time as caretaker coach? I think we all have to agree it's gone fairly well so far, save for a bad loss against St Kilda. Lots of key players missing that day, and I know that that's been something that we've trotted out over the years in recent times, but it was particularly some of our best contributors this year, like McGovern and Waterman have probably been the top two players this season, didn't play. And Duggan and Yeo, I don't think played, and they're probably number 3 and number 4, just talking shit, to be honest, but I think they're pretty close to being the top 4 players on this team, plus maybe an emotional dump. I don't know. It is an outlier, though. In the last 5 weeks, that St Kilda game is an outlier because the stack of form around that has been really good. How much of that do we attribute to Jarrad Schofield? I'll tell you what I see with Schofield, though. There is a big stark contrast to his demeanour to Adam Simpson. Now, I don't want to project on Adam Simpson that he was necessarily tired and burnt out or anything like that, because we are only judging basically his demeanour towards the media. And I think towards the end of his career, there's no doubt he got real sick and tired of the media and their bullshit. So the way he presented in media at press conferences and stuff like that looked like a guy who was kind of done. But from, listening to Jake Waterman on the couch a few months back, I think he said Simo has gone to another level with his engagement with the players and his commitment to their development. So, take that at face value. But what I'd see with Jarrad Schofield is a guy who's enjoying the challenge at the moment, and obviously coming with a far less degree of pressure at the moment, particularly as a caretaker coach. Now, I do think that could flow into next year. I think the pressure will be relatively low for a new coach starting out with a list that is, widely considered to not be that strong, and certainly in the early stages of a rebuild, certainly not at the start, but, fairly early into this. But this sort of goes back to my point of, I've previously said that I think a young coach probably does suit us for a number of factors. We're going to have a young list, and being able to connect with a younger Gen Y playing group is something to be considered. Now, Jarrad Schofield's not super young, but he's relatively young in coaching terms and also hasn't had, an 8-year career as senior coach. So that was sort of my concern with someone like a Nathan Buckley or whoever else was considered somebody who's been senior coach before. I think given the project that is going to be this West Coast Eagles rebuild, we need somebody who's going to be patient and enthusiastic. And Schofield gives me that vibe at the moment. And what I also like is his values, and not just the values that seem to be instilled over the last 5 weeks or whatever. I mean, his reputation at Subiaco in particular was one of driving standards and accountability. And to be honest, those are probably the two biggest things this side has lacked over the last 4 years, or whatever you want to call it. Instilling those standards, it has manifested somewhat in our game plan with, I just found an article, this was actually released before we beat North on the weekend, but it looked at our stats against Fremantle on Gold Coast and how high we rated for pressure. So that is something that we've been talking about instilling in our game style for at least all of this year. I don't know about last year. Last year was a bit of a shambles with injuries, but certainly this year, even Simo was talking about pressure and contest, and at least the numbers now reflect that. Now, I suppose this comes back to the question, what can Jarrad Schofield do? I don't want to take the negative view here, but I almost feel like he can almost do his chances more harm than he can do his chances good with the final 2 games against Carlton and Geelong, because, Carlton's injury crisis at the moment kind of gives us a big sniff. We'll talk about that game more specifically later in the week, but, if we win that and then, play okay against Geelong without getting absolutely slapped, he may not benefit from getting a lot of credit for that. But I tell you what will go against him is if we follow up this 5-week period with 2 lackluster performances again, then it will kind of just leave us pretty much exactly as the team we were for most of 2024, where we would play well on our day and then our worst would be downright embarrassing and we would need nowhere near it. So it's really important that doesn't happen for Schofield's chances, in my opinion. But at the same time, I don't know if he will get due credit if we do play well or even beat Carlton considering their injuries and then, only lose by 7 goals against Geelong. Is that fair? I mean, I suppose everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but To summarise, I've been asked about my thoughts on Jarrad Schofield. I'm quietly hoping he gets the job. I see a guy who's motivated. I see his values as being right for us right now. He looks, given where he's at in his coaching journey, I think he has the temperament and the patience to be here for the long haul. And that's what we want, Again, using the Nathan Buckley example or any other example you want, I was a little bit worried that Buckley would come here, do 4 years and be like, fuck, we haven't really improved. And he might not quit, but he might not, be in it for the long haul, or at least be mentally in it. And I think Schofield does read as the sort of guy who will be patient and build this team for the long haul. And I do like the look of that. But again, I've said this before, none of us are really qualified to have a good handle on this. It's okay to have an opinion. And when asked mine, I will say that I'm quietly hoping Jarrad Schofield does become coach of the West Coast Eagles for a variety of reasons, not just because we've started winning games out of nowhere. I think about what this North and Gold Coast wins could do for this playing group, and I think you look at the North Melbourne game, and again, stats don't indicate that we played well, and I don't think we played well for a large portion of it, but for a quarter and a half, we played with a lot of belief, and I think that's what's been missing. A belief, a commitment to winning games. I don't think... You look at our list, and a lot of them... Well, not many of them, but a lot of them are around for the successful period. And, I contrast this to someone like a Geelong. Look at Geelong. I feel like West Coast did kind of model our list management strategy on someone like a Geelong. And Geelong have been successful at it, where they don't really bottom out. They don't need picks early in the draft. They take their guys and they recruit, mature players, sometimes star players, to top up and propel the list and keep it going. And I think West Coast tried to do that. And I think what happened in 2021 was, well, I don't know exactly what happened, but the arse fell out of this team before the injury crisis. And I think it sent us into this rebuild that we were thinking was going to happen a little bit later. And when I say rebuild, I don't necessarily think West Coast were embracing the possibility that we were going to bottom out again, but I do think that they thought that playing group had a little bit more time left and they could probably propel it a little bit further. This injury crisis has brought us into this rebuild, and it's interesting the effect it's had on the mindset of senior players. Now this year, I think there's certain senior players really trying their guts out. Liam Duggan's a premiership player. Jeremy McGovern, Elliot Yeo. They're looking like they're having fun out there when we win. So the revitalisation of those senior players could hold us in good stead going forward, and I think we'll only have benefits, hopefully, on this rebuild and embracing, getting a lot more young players onto this list. But anyway, I'm digressing. Just a quick note on TB. It does appear that, it was reported that he is set to join Hawthorn. Now, I don't really know what that means, other than to suggest that it sounds like he's verbally agreed with Hawthorn. He hasn't requested a trade yet. Players don't really request trades until the end of the season, although I did just see Alex Neil-Bullen has requested a trade. So it's getting earlier and earlier. I keep saying that. So it was reported initially that Barris had agreed to a 5-year deal. Ryan Daniels has clarified that as 4 years. West Coast have come out and said he hasn't requested a trade. Again, I think this is a little bit smoke and mirrors. I think we all know Barris is going to go join Hawthorn, and I don't blame him at all for that. I think it's been a case of him, wanting a little bit more money because, he took a little bit of a sacrifice to stay at this club, and that's fine with me, honestly. Like if he last year was considering a move to Sydney, he went to West Coast and said, hey, you don't need to pay me as much as Sydney are, but can you do me a favour and bump this up a little bit, because particularly in 2022, he had an outstanding season. I respect the player's right to do that. And at the end of the day, he did want to stay at West Coast. Supposedly we verbally agreed to that. Things have massively changed at West Coast, and the direction of the list, we've got a bit more impetus to be aggressive. So the circumstances change for us, and West Coast now, it doesn't make sense to give Tom Barris a big pay bump and a contract extension given where we're at the moment. It coincides with our desire to get first round draft picks into this list. So to me, it's just the circumstances have all aligned. I think Tom Barris does want to stay at West Coast, but the situation has changed and he can get what he wants financially in terms of job security at another club. I don't think he's betraying us. I think it's West Coast probably have changed their keenness on signing him up to a long-term deal. So I do think that will happen. To what extent do we get good draft compensation? A lot of that's yet to play out because Hawthorn are now in the top 8, and if they win a final, that first round draft pick gets worse and worse. Does that mean that we can leverage that to get 2 first round picks for Hawthorn? We'll discuss that at a later date. It's going to be an interesting one to play out, but I think all things considered, this is best for the footy club. And finally on Tim English, it does sound like he has more or less decided to stay at the Western Bulldogs, despite a slightly better offer from West Coast. He's joining the Bulldogs. Now this has made public in light of the recent weekend where he got absolutely annihilated by Riley O'Brien. And I think everyone's looking at that going, maybe we don't really want Tim English, considering, he would cost a bit in salary. So my view on this was that he was going to improve our team, and our ruck situation isn't good. Regardless of what your thoughts are on Tim English, he'd still be better than what we have, and he wouldn't cost us anything in draft capital. But it sounds like we've missed out on him. And I'm okay with that. I don't think it was the end of the world. It would have improved us, but ultimately, it wouldn't have really moved the needle that much. So it is what it is. We have a little bit more money, with Barris leaving, Gaff retiring. We'll sign Jack Graham on some money. I don't think it'll be a massive contract. More Harley Reid money. We've still got him to extend. So that'll do with my thoughts on everything West Coast at the moment, guys. Let me know in the comments about anything I've said in this video, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.